Why then are you going back to the old, failed way of doing it, which will not work?
Angela Rayner has found herself in a proper sticky situation, hasn't she? The Labour bigwig was practically left squirming in her seat during a brutal interrogation from none other than Conservative Member of Parliament Mark Francois. It was a full-on interrogation that left Rayner looking a lot more nervous than she usually seems. Not to mention, the timing of these accusations against her couldn't be any worse, considering the Labour's already drowning in hot water over its flailing projects, and the heat's particularly fierce when it comes to Rayner's dodgy housing scheme.
So today, I'll explain how Labour will deliver the change needed to turbocharge growth and build more homes. And I'll start with housing targets. Decisions about what to build should reflect local views, but that should be about how to deliver new homes, not whether to. Whilst the previous government watered down housing targets, caving into their anti-growth backbenchers, this Labour government is taking the tough choices, putting people and country first. For the first time, we'll make local housing targets mandatory, requiring local authorities to use the same method to work out how many homes to build. But, Mr. Speaker, that alone is insufficient to meet our ambition. So we're also changing the standard method used to calculate housing need, so it better reflects the urgency of supply for local areas.
Remember when Angela went all out during the general elections, boasting about the party's massive commitments? These commitments included a promise to deliver a whopping 1.5 million houses across the country before their time's up. Sounds grand, right? Seems like Angela Rayner did not crunch the numbers when she made a grand announcement like that. Why so? Perhaps because of the sheer number itself. 1.5 million houses is not a joke. A housing charity has dropped a bomb, revealing that the target set by the government means that they would have to build at least 90,000 social homes a year to achieve their motives. Sounds noble, right?
For the first time, we'll make local housing targets mandatory, requiring local authorities to use the same method to work out how many homes to build. But, Mr. Speaker, that alone is insufficient to meet our ambition. So we're also changing the standard method used to calculate housing need, so it better reflects the urgency of supply for local areas. Rather than relying on outdated data, this new method will require local authorities to plan for homes proportionate to the size of existing communities. And it will incorporate an uplift where house prices are most out of step with local incomes. The collective total of these local targets will therefore rise from some 300,000 a year to just over 370,000 a year.
Now, here's where it gets juicy. While this seems like a project beneficial for the public, Member of Parliament Mark Francois has blasted the Labour Party, claiming that every move they've made until now has been anything but for the people. In fact, he's saying it's been downright opposite.
It is possible to have successful development, but from experience, it has to be something that you do with people and not to people. This is the latter. These pernicious top-down targets have the practical effect at ground level of setting one town against another, one village against another, and one local community against another.
Angela Rayner has just gone a complete 180 on her regime's bold claim about those 1.5 million houses. Instead of charging ahead with that promise, she's now focusing on building brand new towns in the low greenbelt areas. What's more interesting here is the fact that English councils will have to start playing the land allocation game all over again for the government's shiny new housing policy. Sounds a bit like a recipe for disaster, doesn't it?
And given the Chancellor's statement on public spending yesterday, who will pay for the tens of billions of pounds of infrastructure that would be required to make all of this work?
Now that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Who's actually going to pay for all these ambitious projects the Labour government is so hell-bent on pushing through? Certainly not the Brits, who already have a hole in their wallets. Or will they? Not to mention, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, have made matters much more complicated when she announced several cutbacks and taxes on UK citizens to cope with the country's economic situation. Rachel Reeves also hinted that all of the departments, including medical and housing, were bound to receive a cutback from the ludicrous amounts of funds granted by the previous government. But here's the kicker. This isn't just a simple budget trim. This move is hitting the most vulnerable, especially our pensioners, right where it hurts. Robbing the old people off for a few quids for these grandeur projects while blowing off thousands for personal fun. Seems like the Labour government have forgotten their manifesto. Not to mention, despite these savage cutbacks, the Labour government is still demanding a hefty amount of cash from the British public. Talk about rubbing salt in the wounds.
All experience shows that on development and house building, the man or the woman in Whitehall really does not know best. Yeah. Why then are you going back to the old, failed way of doing it, which will not work?
Mark Francois is correct, because imposing development targets from the Whitehall isn't exactly the best strategy, as it disregards local knowledge and conditions. Not to mention, the expense of these projects is huge based on centralized planning, by those who are far removed from the day-to-day realities, making decisions that impact local communities without sufficient input from the affected people. Seems like throwing a dart blindfolded and hoping for the best. You can see how Angelarayner dodged the question of who is going to pay for all this and redefined the Labour Party's ambition once again, trying to insinuate that the housing plan is a must despite major expenses. When would we start getting straight answers for these types of questions instead of the same old political blame game?
There are simply not enough homes. Those on the benches opposite knew this, but what did they do for 14 years? As my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, said yesterday, they ducked the difficult decisions, they put party before country. They pulled the wool over people's eyes by crowing about getting 1 million new homes in this last Parliament. But they failed to get anywhere near their target of 300,000 homes a year. And in a bid to appease their anti-housing backbenchers, they made housing targets only advisable. They knew that this would tank housing supply, but they still did it. And as I stand here today, I can now reveal the result. That the number of new homes is now likely to drop below 200,000 this year.
On the other hand, we have Mark Francois, who called out these empty promises that are ringing hollow across the UK. He is surely projecting the masses who are frustrated and want answers to their questions. So what's the endgame here? Are we risking the future of our communities for the sake of bureaucratic convenience? The stakes couldn't be higher, and it's time to ask, are we truly building a better future, or just creating a mess that no one can clean up?